part. I am very pleased to be introducing our presenter today, Mia Strand. Mia is an early career researcher with Nelson Mandela University in South Africa, specializing in integrating indigenous and local knowledge systems in area-based ocean management processes through art-based participatory research approaches. She's a co-investigator with the One Ocean Hub and Algo Bay project, exploring practical ways in which ocean management can become more participatory and inclusive. Her current research interest includes art-based methods, transdisciplinary participatory research, marine cultural heritage, and children's right to a healthy ocean. Welcome, Mia.
Thank you so much, Adnan. I really appreciate it. Thank you. Firstly, I just wanted to say thank you so much for having me, and good morning, good afternoon, it's good evening. I'm currently in Cape Town, South Africa, and I also acknowledge that this is Khoisan San Indigenous land. And I'm very grateful to be here today, and it's very exciting to chat to you all today, even though I really wish that I could be there. But yeah, thank you for the introduction, Shabnam. And I was going to say a few words, but I feel like you know a lot about me already now, so I'm going to go on with the presentation. Today, I just want to share a little bit about my research. So I am a PhD candidate from Nelson Mandela University, and I'm presenting today on behalf of myself and my supervisors, Dr. Nina Rivers and Professor Bernadette Snow, but also on behalf of my co-researchers, who you'll get to know a bit better throughout the presentation today. We wanted to have a lot of them present today, but it is 9 o'clock on a Friday. So I am unfortunately the only one here today, but they know this more than I do. So I'm sure they're bored of hearing it. So a little bit of an outline. First, I'm just going to set a little bit of the scene. Some of you might know the South African context, some of you don't. So I'm just going to give a little bit of background, and then I'm going to go through the methods and quite thorough, and then go through some of the cultural connections and knowledge that's come through from the research process thus far. And then discuss some of the opportunities and implications that have for ocean management, specifically in South Africa, but also more broadly on a regional scale. I'm then going to reflect a bit about the methods and the processes, and yeah, just show some further reading if you're interested. Yes, so just a little bit about setting the scene, and what we found, and which isn't something new, is that a lot of area-based ocean management processes, such as marine spatial planning, marine protected areas, often have a very strong focus on economic or environmental objectives. As you can see in this very beautiful graphic by MSP Global, you can see all the beautiful fish and animals, seaweeds. You can see the shipping, the industry, and a boat on top, but there's no humans, and there's not necessarily any cultural engagements with the ocean and the coast. And there is a recognized lack of research on social cultural dimensions and human dimensions in marine governance. And specifically, at least in Southern Africa, there's no clear answers on how to best integrate indigenous and local knowledge into area-based ocean management. And specifically in a context of South Africa, with a very violent history of colonialism and apartheid and forced removals from the ocean and coast, this continues to exclude people who depend on the ocean and coast, and can hinder opportunities for collaboration, participation, and even reproduce social inequalities. So my PhD is looking at the usefulness of specific arts-based participatory research methods. And I am working in two specific contexts. So I'm working with something called the Algoa Bay project, which is a marine spatial planning pilot project in Algoa Bay. And you can see a picture here of the biggest city in Algoa Bay, which is Beja, which is beautiful, stunning coastline. And the other project is near something called Utukela Marine Protected Area in northern KZN, so further up the coast towards Mozambique. And here it's also, although the marine protected area is already proclaimed, it's in the process of developing a management plan. So we're trying to find ways of kind of influencing that as best as possible. But today I'll be mainly presenting on Algoa Bay and the Marine Spatial Planning Project, as this is, we've come further in that process, and it's way more tangible results than preliminary findings, so way more exciting stuff at the moment. And as I mentioned, specifically in Algoa Bay as well, and in what used to be Port Elizabeth, now Beja, there is a violent history of forced removals and institutionalized racism through apartheid and colonialization, which have impacted people's access to the ocean and the coast, and comes out quite strongly in people's connections, current and historical connections. And then my specific project is an exploratory project with a socio-ecological systems lens, recognizing that we are part of one system and we coexist with nature around us, and we influence nature, nature influences us. And the emphasis is really on participatory methods, as will become even clearer. And which means that people that I've worked with have been recognized as co-researchers and also have influence over how the methods are developed and shaped, and also the objectives of the research process. And in South Africa, also because of a long history of, several stages of colonization and different communities and groups coming down to the coast, it's quite a blurry line in terms of indigenous and local communities. And you can read pages upon pages about that, but also in our publication we go a bit more in depth. But just for saving time, I'm not going to go too deep, but here we've really worked with people who live off and near the coast and who self-identify as indigenous or as local communities who have a special attachment to a specific location. And in this case, Algoa Bay or near Utukela. And we've been working with subsistence fishers, bait collectors, traditional healers, sangomas. We've been working with youth, with conservation engagement people, marine educators. Yeah, so a broad variety of people. So looking at the specific research process, we wanted to use arts-based methods because of previous research and projects that are really found the opportunities of art in terms of expressing different ways of knowing and being in the world, and through different shapes and forms. And although it's not a new thing at all that we need to better recognize social cultural dimensions and indigenous and local knowledge in ocean management, it seems to kind of be within an echo chamber and not necessarily through very practical ways of doing this. And so we thought this could be a way of creating a space for what has been excluded or silenced lived experiences and histories. And we believe that art can allow for different ways of seeing and experiencing the world and looking through different lenses and frames. And what's been really important is that me, with the white non-indigenous positionality as an outsider, should not be in the position of telling someone else's stories. And so what's been very important in this process is that everyone who's shared their stories and their photographs and knowledge remains the owners of that knowledge and those outputs, which has also been done possible through the arts process. I just wanted to highlight a couple of authors that have been important for me also, from the States and from Canada, Powell and Castellet and Levy, and some of their work through arts-based methods is really amazing, and it's been very inspiring. And here's a picture of Paramount Chief William Human, and where he is on what used to be Khoisan land, where they've been removed several times in several stages, which is, as you will see more through the presentation as well. So once we kind of got a sense of the project, and we started talking to people across the Bay, and we built on existing networks and relationships that were already built, because people have established those for years. But what was important, that we had workshops where we could shape and mold the research process and the questions together and the objectives. So we met with Khoisan community groups, with small-scale fishers, with marine educators and youth groups, with representatives and organizations working with, for example, women within the fishing industry and other ocean users who felt that they have been marginalized and excluded from marine decision-making this far. And we just asked very open-ended questions. What do you think about when you think about the ocean? What does the ocean mean to you, if anything? What are your priorities? What do you like about the ocean or the coast? And as a caveat, Algoa Bay, which stretches from, I should have had a map, but which stretches from Cape Recife to Cannon Rocks, is a almost the whole city is wrapped around the coast. And so I haven't met a single person in and around Algoa Bay, even though they live, 2 hours inland, who don't have a strong connection to the ocean and the coast. So when we kind of, through the shaping workshops and the initial connections, found 24 people who were very excited to join the process, although I couldn't promise them any tangible results or high expectations in terms of change in policy, because of what I think is silly rules that we can't reimburse people for their time and pay people for their time. It's not a lot of amazing things in terms of being part of this process other than just sharing your story and taking part in an exploratory project. But in the case of Algoa Bay, we had 24 co-researchers, varying, like I said, from subsistence fishers to Khoisan representatives, traditional healers, bay collectors. And we came together and had photography and storytelling workshops. And because I'm not an expert, we had a photojournalist or photo voice expert there to share with us some of the key kind of takeaways and key learnings and how to take photos, tell a story through recorded stories or through photos using smartphones, because that was more accessible and meant that more people could use it later on. We then workshopped photography and storytelling, and you can see a picture here where we were on the beach just outside one of the workshop venues. And we wanted to practice in surrounding areas. And it was very important for us to organize the workshops adjacent to where people do live or where they do go and visit the ocean, the coast. That was also a big thing in terms of relationality and having a conducive space of sharing. So after that, we did field visits. So I accompanied all the co-researchers to sites of significance and where they wanted to go, where we did in situ photography and storytelling. And here's also important to share that some people wanted to go off and record on their own, whilst others wanted to have a conversation and feel more natural in terms of that way of sharing their story or their knowledge. And we found that there's a big variety in terms of people looking at past connections or stories versus present and future. And of course, looking back at the specific context of South Africa makes sense because a lot of people have had very strong relationship to the ocean and coast and lived there, but have been removed from that. And so looking back is also a way of imagining a different future. Also, the field visits, it's been spending a lot of time, I think more or less 2 full days per co-researchers, just to make sure that we were able to be everywhere where people wanted to go and have adequate time to take the pictures they wanted to take and record the stories they wanted to record. We then organized sense-making workshops where we came together and analyzed the photographs and the stories and came up with specific themes that kind of were like overarching themes. And we kind of workshopped them with Post-its and drawing and colors and adding to them, changing them, molding them. And we co-developed some legends for participatory community mapping. So as you can see on this picture here, we kind of had a color according to each legend. I can't share the maps yet because that's also preliminary findings, but that will come up soon. But that was also to fit in with the marine spatial planning process. And we were kind of testing how much it made sense for the co-researchers and to put down the different uses and connections they had to specific areas of the coast. Through those sense-making workshops, we also planned the exhibition and the specific stories that people wanted to share. And we discussed how we can integrate these stories and knowledges in ocean management. We then organized an exhibition at the South End Museum this March, which was amazing. We had all the co-researchers there with family and friends. We had government officials leading the MSP process, people from the Marine Heritage kind of agency at SARA in South Africa. But we also had more local coastal managers and provincial conservation authorities. So it kind of created a space for people to discuss the different photos and the stories, but also a space for co-researchers to engage directly with coastal managers and conservation authorities that do manage the areas that they value. And yeah, I'm writing a piece on kind of exhibitionist storytelling now. So if any of you have any good materials on that, please share. But kind of looking at exhibition as a medium in and of itself and the coming together of people around something physical that is, even though it's part of people and their stories and lived experiences, is also removing that and creating this little bit of a distance to look at it from a different point of view and without it being embodied in the same way. So yeah, hopefully something exciting coming out of that. But after the exhibition, we had a workshop also with the same people. I think we were almost 50 people in total. So the co-researchers and authorities and coastal managers workshopping how can these cultural connections and Indigenous and local knowledge better be acknowledged and recognized in area-based ocean management, and specifically in the forthcoming marine spatial planning process in South Africa. And that paper is coming out any day soon, and it's led by my supervisor, Dr. Nina Rivers. So I just want to share a couple of stories with you because I was given 45 minutes, which I'm very excited about. So I just wanted to share here from Yassine, who says that I wouldn't want to see a future where our children's children or our children won't be able to experience the ocean like we have. If we continue the way we're going, we'll pollute the ocean, we'll pollute the land around the ocean, and that will destroy it. The ocean is beautiful, and we should do anything to protect it so that our children can see the beauty that we see today and that our parents saw yesterday. Then from Hesse, the sea is a place where the Khoisan sand, both men and women, lived. We would fetch our food from the ocean, dig holes on the beach, and build fires to cook our food that we gathered from the ocean. This was also the nearest place where the Khoisan family could connect with their ancestors, should they wish to do so. This is where we have a straight connection with the ancestors. Then Taryn says, I hope we can see this one day, just how slowly the water comes in and drowns out all of the worries. The ocean is just washing away everything. It's so relaxing and calming. The more fishing, the better. If I can sustain myself on fishing, that will make me happy. That means more time with family. We need more time with family, says Francis. And Polisa says, as a traditional healer, I use the ocean for many things. And the reason why I love protecting the ocean is because the ocean attracts me. Its consciousness connects me with the ancestors. And every time when I'm near the ocean, I feel home, I feel safe. I feel loved, and I feel protected. We should be careful of what we do to the sea. And if you do want to see all of the stories and the pictures, we do have a virtual exhibition online on the One Ocean Hub YouTube channel. But of course, it's not the same as being in person. So hopefully we can bring it to you one day. And what really came out from the stories and the photographs was strong cultural connections to the ocean and the coast. And when I talk about kind of cultural dimensions from the start of this presentation, that wasn't something we necessarily knew from before. And even though we knew that the ocean and the coast and the estuaries are really important for people's subsistence and livelihoods and work and income, we didn't know that there were such strong cultural connections across people in the Bay. And I use culture as a very broad term here. And again, if we've written on it, if you want to read more, but I could go on for hours. So, but very basically here in terms of the themes that we co-identified in Algoa Bay, where recreational, fun, and family time, spiritual and religious connections, like Sia Sanga's quote here, that they respect the sea a lot because believe it's where ancestors lived and continue to live. This is our place of serenity and our prayer altar. There's also intangible and tangible cultural heritage connected to the ocean and the coast. And the ocean is a place for learning and exploration. And what came out really strongly as well is that the ocean and the coast is vital for health and healing. And beyond this, we also found, in terms of the mapping, what was really important was looking at future connections, because present can't really show the reality that people want to see. But we also found that some of the stories and the ways of expressing through photos and recorded stories were reimagining coexistence with the ocean and the coast. And like I said, it allowed for a space for remembering the past as has been, and also imagining different futures. And we find that it doesn't always have to be about conflict. There's a lot of synergies alongside Indigenous practices and use of the ocean and coast, local priorities and connections and conservation objectives in terms of keeping the ocean clean for healing purposes and cleansing purposes. We also find that a lot of people want to be more involved. They want to have access to the coast to clean the beach and to do rituals that actually involve picking up trash and plastic. And they want to be part of kind of managing areas of the coast that are important to them. And we find that more access would actually allow this. And we talk about often, or at least in the echo chambers I am in, this importance of recognize the coexistence with the ocean and the coast. And it's, you know, it's not something new, it's something so old. And in Khoisan tradition, that has always been the way of thinking and the way of being. And we also believe that more participation in decision making and hearing voices would highlight these cultural connections, and therefore recognizing people's priorities and engagements with the ocean and coast better. So some of the implications for ocean management, specifically in South Africa, is that, like I said, these cultural connections really illuminate people's interactions with the ocean and coast. So give a better understanding of how people use and want to use the ocean and coast. And despite these really strong connections, there's continued exclusion and lack of access for people. So, for example, in Cape Recife, there are ancient Khoisan fish traps, and people don't have access to these. And Sundays River or Sundays Estuary, which is just a stone throw away from Culture's community, you have to pay to access. You can't even get access to the beach, even though that is a right in South Africa. And we find that even though cultural heritage is such a strong aspect of a lot of people's communities and lives in South Africa, it's really missing from marine spatial planning practice and literature, and also in marine protected areas. And yes, it is difficult to map and we shouldn't necessarily quantify intangible cultural heritage. And this is something that needs to be considered in the future when doing participatory community mapping as well. However, there's a great sense of urgency in terms of recognizing these knowledges and connections and stories. Specifically in Cape Recife, there might be urban development that could jeopardize the ancient fish traps. And also in South Africa, with a history of kind of cultural genocide, language is dying out, and people are struggling to translate their cultural heritage and traditions to the next generation. There's also opportunities, and we do really find that these methods can illuminate intangible cultural heritage, such as the ocean as where the ancestors reside. And we also find that there are opportunities to co-identify ways of better recognize Indigenous and local knowledge in ocean management. The mapping that we've done will actually feed into the post marine area plans for the Algoa Bay area. And although it is problematic trying to fit in something into a system that isn't necessarily recognizing you, it is a step forward, and it might still mean that some areas might be recognized for people's connections beyond just the environmental and the economic. Some of these methods have also highlighted procedural and substantive human rights in terms of participation and in terms of people's Indigenous rights. And even though UNDRIP is recognized in South Africa, we see that it's not supported enough by the legal framework. And we also find that there are opportunities for declaring or nominating national heritage sites. So during the exhibition, we had someone from the National Heritage Authority who asked us why, or asked some of the Khoisan leaders why they hadn't nominated the fish traps as a national heritage site. And just because of that knowledge, they didn't know about that knowledge, that process is now in place. So hopefully there'll be news about that soon. And there's also opportunities now to expand on what marine cultural heritage is in a South African context, but also in a Southern African context, because current understandings are often limited to shipwrecks, which is often highlighting completely different history. And like I said before, there are overlaps between cultural connections and conservation objectives, which is exciting and doesn't have to always be about conflict. So reflecting a bit about the methods, for me personally, and I am co-writing a paper with most of the co-researchers, what I see and what we've discussed is that it's been so much about learning and unlearning how you think you know something and how you come to know something. And it's been such an amazing process and journey, getting to know a lot of people. I've been so lucky to get to know and forming these bonds just over our kind of joint love for the ocean and the coast. And the open-endedness, the participatory structure or lack of structure is a challenge, because a lot of people do want some kind of structure to hold on to, and it's not necessarily for everyone. But we do find that at the same time, it does allow opportunities for people to really decide and have a little bit of ownership in terms of how they want to share. And in the South African context, with 11 official languages and even more, the opportunities for everyone to share and discuss and to engage in your own language has been so important. And because of that and all the other factors, time is a crucial component, and you have to be flexible in terms of changing plans and workshops and field visits on the day if necessary, because of people's others' commitments. And it's really about fostering relationship, building trust, and that takes time. So again, replicating this research, I can't stress enough how much it is about really having that time and being able to shape the research from the start. And I think building on existing relationships really, really help with that. And yeah, I've tried to kind of align it to theories of unraveling, meshing, and unraveling knowledge. Thank you, Catherine. And would recommend everyone to read the paper by Diego Galafasi on exactly that, because that for me kind of gave some sense of how it looks like of the unlearning and then co-learning together and producing knowledge together. And again, a lot of these stories and knowledges, it's again coming back to a violent past, but also to a violent current or current situation. So for example, Bradley here tells us how he's never been to the beach until we went and he saw dolphins, and it was very exciting. But even there, it's just by his community, but still he doesn't have access because it's private owned land and you have to pay to access. And we still see that exclusion to this day. And it's something that really is painful even in the current scenario. And reflecting a little bit about the process, why do we even speak of science to policy if we can do knowledge to policy? Why am I even part of this structure? Why should it not be a direct link between the Indigenous and local knowledge holders and the policymakers? And I did ask this in a workshop I was in recently when we were talking about the possible heritage site. And I said, I shouldn't be here. And then someone pointed out very pointedly that, yes, you should, because you have the time and you have the resources to do so. And I do think this is something that we need to continue to reflect on. And I feel like the goal is that we don't need that academic middle person for that. But I guess in South Africa, at least at the moment, to some extent, in some instances, it could be needed, or at least we can use processes such as art to convey, for people to have opportunities to convey their knowledge. And thinking about knowledge that shouldn't be mapped, that is sensitive and that is sacred. And I think, again, it's important to move away from this idea of integration, because why should you integrate into a system or a structure that doesn't include you, or that doesn't recognize you or acknowledge you, and that is violent? And so I think to some extent, if the system doesn't value you, we need to rethink the system. And I can come back to that later. But it's also the problems of trying to think and work in transdisciplinary teams when a lot of the practice, often in government and academia, continues to be quite sector or discipline or department separated, or like according to that. So that's also a challenge. But one of the main things that I've taken away from this process and this amazing journey, and that I really, really learned from a co-management course with Haida Gwai with Cindy and Hillary, was the focus on common ground. So instead of always looking at conflict and what we don't have in common and where we might clash, looking at where are we meeting, where are common priorities, and what do we care about. So very quickly, some learning and recommendations. I don't like the word recommendations because I don't think I'm the one to recommend anything, but some learnings is that it's so important to do initial co-creation from the start. And that's what we're seeing with area-based ocean management, whether it's marine spatial planning, marine protected areas. It can't be an add-on tick box exercise. It needs to be from the start. And one of those ways of getting there, I think, is involving social scientists, cultural heritage specialists, and obviously Indigenous and local knowledge holders from the start. And also explore opportunities for greater co-management, like Haidagwai again, because if people could actually be stewards of their own land, they would be managing that according to their own cultural heritage and connections. And I think participatory community mapping, although I'm not an expert, is never too late, because we need adaptive management. And that means that other things than the very kind of economic or industry-based things or environmental aspects can be highlighted as well. And we need to expand our understanding of marine cultural heritage, again, like I said, beyond shipwrecks and the very kind of tangible, often colonial history. Here's just a quote by Milani, who had an amazing time when we went exploring the rock pools and is adamant that he's going to be a future marine biologist, which I'm sure about too. So if you do want to read a bit more, we have a couple of papers out which go way more in depth, and we have 2 videos on the One Ocean Hub YouTube page. So one is the actual virtual exhibition, and one is just a project video, a little bit about the opening night, and also with some engagements from the co-researchers, which is very exciting. So yeah, I just want to say thank you so much for your time. I see I have 5 minutes. That means more time for questions. And also I'm coming to Vancouver in January and February. So if anyone has any tips on what to do, I've heard it's very cold. Please let me know. And I'm very happy to meet up for a coffee or anything, because I'm going to be there for almost 3 weeks. So yeah, and please stay in touch. I would love to hear from you. So if you're not able to ask your question, please email me.